Welcome to another edition of Regulatory Ramblings Briefs. Our guest today is Donald Day of VDX. He was, until recently, with the SFC in Hong Kong, the capital markets regulator. And our chat with him is going to be bifurcated in that an abbreviated version will appear first, and if you'd like to view the full version, that will be uploaded in due course. Among the things we'll be talking about are Hong Kong's new VASP platform regime and Hong Kong's prospects as a FinTech and crypto hub, the prospects for sound regulation, and really what the business community needs to know. And with that, Don, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me.
Much obliged. So tell me a little bit about your new venture, VDX. I mean, what types of clients do you typically serve?
Sure. So we're building a platform. We're currently engaging with the regulator, my former colleagues, to obtain a license to run a virtual asset trading platform. And our focus is really on the institutional markets. So our clients would be intermediaries themselves, broker-dealers, banks, as well as institutional investors like fund managers, asset managers.
It's quite a background you've got in both finance and computing. I mean, in a real sense, one could say you're a techie who's been on the business side, and you've also been a regulator. So if you bring all that knowledge to bear, what was the moment that caused you to pay more attention to the world of digital assets, as you like to call them? And we'll get into why that is very shortly.
Sure, thank you. So I was COO of a derivatives brokerage, and I met up with a former colleague of mine. We were sitting next to each other at Securities, the hedge fund. He had recently come back from being a portfolio manager at the Harvard Endowment Fund. And I knew he'd come back to Hong Kong, and I was eager to learn what his next venture would be. And he then told me he was contemplating setting up a hedge fund in cryptocurrencies. At that point, I felt I had missed crypto. Mind you, Bitcoin was trading at $1,300 at that time.
Right. And even then, people thought it was expensive.
Absolutely. And at that point, I also felt that it was mostly used for illegal activities, if you will.
Yeah.
And
that was the narrative of the last decade.
Well, exactly.
Yeah.
But someone like him, who has quite a reputation to put his professional career onto this, into crypto, made me look again and get more into the details of the technology and what it offers. And the idea was to create a institutional framework, as you know, from other asset classes, and bring that as an asset manager into the crypto world. So over lunch we discussed this, very quickly agreed to work together. I joined him and another guy who was responsible for capital raising.
Okay. So, and I know, you're the first ex-regulator or regulator period that we've had on the show, so this is an auspicious day. Tell us about your time at the SFC and what it was like working for the local securities regulator. What was the best or most rewarding part of your job, and in retrospect, what do you think was your greatest achievement while you were there? What was the best? What was the greatest thing you added to that institution during your time there?
Maybe let me explain why I joined the regulator, because that wasn't the natural path for me to take, and it wasn't on my career plan at all. So as and when I left Bletchley Park, I had a lot of conversations where to go next. And the first conversation with the regulator happened almost by coincidence. Former colleague of my wife, we met for lunch and had a conversation. And as I was going through the interview rounds, I was very impressed by the people I met. They were highly intelligent. They asked very, very good questions. We very quickly had very engaging discussions
at
around
the SFC.
Yes. I had very engaging conversations. It showed me they knew a lot, but other areas they realized they needed market intelligence and market experience. And I then sat back and realized that being able to play a role in shaping regulation for a new asset class is not an opportunity you get very often in your life. The second part is that when we launched Bletchley Park, we had a very good setup, and the setup would still work to this day and would get a license to this day. The issue was obviously timing. 2017 tail end, 2018 wasn't the greatest time to raise money for such an venture. And I went back to a lot of the asset allocators, where we all got into the final round. They all said, we love you. But a lot of them did pull the trigger, and I asked them why. They all had various different reasons, but the number one reason was always the same: the lack of regulatory clarity.
Locally.
Globally. So I felt that if I could play a role in that, that should be quite satisfying, and should also be quite valuable, and should also enable me to make connections to regulators around the world. So that's sort of the reasons why I joined the SFC.
Well, it's a highly regarded regulator, and they do maintain regular contacts with their colleagues in the EU and UK and US. So I can only imagine the contacts you made while there. While there, you also authored the VATP terms and conditions to give input to VAFM terms and conditions, and you wrote the rule book on how to supervise virtual asset funds as well as virtual asset platforms. What can you tell us about what compelled you to do that at that time, and what a challenge it was, because you were breaking new ground?
That is probably one of the things I'm really proud of, that to being part of that, and all the hard work that the colleagues did to bring that to fruition. So at the time I joined, there was still certain doubt whether a Securities and Futures regulator could actually or should regulate cryptocurrencies. The SFC, as you know, is mandated by the SFO, the Securities and Futures Ordinance, which was written in 2003. So obviously there is no reference to cryptocurrencies. And it's very specific, and it describes in great detail what a security and what a future is. And crypto is neither. So there were some people who opined that a Securities and Futures regulator should not be involved in crypto. But the majority of the people in charge felt that crypto as an asset class was here to stay, and that not doing anything was not an option. And at the time, of course, Hong Kong was seen as one of the global centers of cryptocurrencies, and a lot of entities were at least seen or perceived.
Emerging.
Yes.
Emerging.
And a lot of the entities were seen or perceived to at least be in Hong Kong. And at the time, of course, you also had, remember 2018, 2019, there were a lot of ICO scams, people lost money. So the regulator felt, well, we need to do something. So the challenge was now to understand how to translate the requirements of other asset classes into the area of digital or virtual assets. So how do you take the requirements for AML KYC, but also market surveillance, custody, cybersecurity, risk management, and others, and transport them into the area of virtual assets? And that's, I think, a key, and I know we'll come back to this question later, but at that point, the responsible people took a very good but also difficult decision. So what does a regulator do? If you want to condense it, a regulator protects investors, such that investor assets aren't stolen, that investors, when they trade on the market, they're not at a disadvantage to other market participants. As a fair and transparent market, and that assets that are in custody remain in custody. A lot of other jurisdictions at the time, decided to take a more light touch approach to regulation. They said, well, AML and KYC is probably enough. Whereas the regulator in Hong Kong decided on a comprehensive framework to really focus on investor protection.
But that's more challenging. It'll take more time. You have to work out more details. Unlike what Dubai's done.
Absolutely. So that took a long time, as you alluded to, that took a long time to create. A lot of people internally needed to give input and needed to, in a way, combine the traditional approach and the technicalities and then the trading aspects of digital or virtual assets, and then identify, can the SFC license a trading platform and how to supervise it? Is a bit more straightforward for fund managers. This was very well understood, and there were certain provisions in terms of what fund managers need to do to protect investor assets, and obviously the potential access to assets is far more immediate for a trader or portfolio manager than in other asset classes. A portfolio manager could not easily abscond with the actual stocks that he's trading, still held by a prime broker and by CCAS in the end. But this is more easily possible in digital and virtual assets, but there are ways to protect that. So that was quite clear. And the licensing journey and then the supervisory journey for trading platforms was a bit more involved, but then also turned out to be possible. Hence, the first and then the second license were issued.
Was it time well spent? Was the final product worth all the time and the effort that was put into it?
Absolutely. And I've said this at a conference in January. I'm really, really proud what Hong Kong has done. Because at the time, there was a lot of criticism of the framework. And several market participants said it's very onerous, it's very complex. Other jurisdictions think about this in a different manner, in a more business-like manner. And quite a few entities decided to leave Hong Kong. Now, it would be anyway a bit concerning if people in a way run away from regulation or want to not be regulated well, because the regulatory framework for virtual assets does not have any more stringent requirements than for any other asset class. So there's a catchy phrase, same business, same risk, same rules. That's sort of like the principle that was applied. So the requirement...
That's not what they were saying, though.
Yes.
The industry?
Well,
the ones that were complaining.
Well, and this is important to differentiate. Those market participants who came in from traditional finance with experience of being regulated and licensed, they had
used to light touch.
They had no surprise. So the requirements, for example, on a dark pool at an investment bank are very similar to the requirements on a virtual asset trading platform operator. I mean,
that needs to be stressed more, I'd say.
I agree. But people who came from that kind of environment, maybe an investment bank, had been involved in maybe trading derivatives or a bit more quantitative portfolio management, it may be involving the challenges of running a dark pool. People who maybe came from the buy side but had maybe a quant or stat arb background, not just a long only background. These people had no hesitation to understand and adhere to the trading platform framework, licensing framework. It was rather people who came, who did not have that background, who maybe only had a background in virtual assets, who felt that the regulation was heavy-handed, too complex, not leading to innovation.
So then perhaps their response can be seen more accurately in the light of a lack of experience and a lack of sophistication, perhaps naivete on their part of it. I mean, because what you're describing, I mean, I'm almost hearing shades of what I was hearing in 2006 when hedge funds were saying to, was it Alexa Lam at the time at the SFC, saying to her, and she said this at a Hong Kong Securities Institute event that I attended, again, 06, 07, Singapore does not require this of hedge funds. And her response was the SFC wouldn't budge. They stood their ground. They said, fine, then go to Singapore. And it turned out that it served Hong Kong well, because not long after that, the global financial crisis happened, and I won't say Hong Kong was unscathed, but it could have been worse. You know, it could always be worse. So,
and that's, if I may use that, that's a great analogy, because if you look back at the past 12, 18 months and everything that has happened, and what has happened was really dramatic because people got hurt and real people lost real money. But none of the failures, bankruptcies happened in Hong Kong. And quite a few of them actually happened in jurisdictions that took a much more light touch approach. Now, you see a jurisdiction like Singapore, who now has issued a consultation and by all intents and purposes seems to be really following on the footsteps of what Hong Kong did 4 years ago. And they're changing their framework. And what seems to be coming out is very, very similar to the framework Hong Kong issued 4 years ago. So that has 2 or 3 effects. One, that Hong Kong was able to protect the investors. 2, Hong Kong has enabled a framework that is conducive for institutional investors. As an institutional investor, I can only deal with a licensed and regulated counterparty. 3, Hong Kong has a framework that, while now is being finessed and potentially widened and expanded, is stable, has provided a stable framework to running a business. Because if you start a business and operate a business, you need to be aware of the framework under which you operate. And that, to a large degree, has been unchanged since the framework was launched. Whereas if you're in another jurisdiction, if you start your business under one framework and that suddenly dramatically changes, your business strategy might not work anymore. Your business might not be feasible anymore. And it's not the case that in all circumstances you can just relocate your business to a different country. You might not, the staff might have families and not be able to relocate that easily. And there's always, in the institutional finance world, there's always a great emphasis on trust and perception. And you do not want to be seen as an entity that frequently changes its headquarters, frequently relocates. That doesn't lead to an image of stability.
No, it doesn't instill confidence. Again, it's long been said, progress is slow in Hong Kong, but it's stable. Singapore's a bit faster, but they have a state-led development model. We tend to leave things more to the market. And the market tends to adopt the wait-and-see approach of let's pick and choose the best aspects from around the world and apply them to the extent that they serve our purposes, to our needs. So when we talk about stability and predictability, then what is the danger that a place like Dubai faces, where they seem to have given the crypto community everything they want? Light touch, some might even say self-regulation. Cynics would say light touch regulation, self-regulation means no regulation. What are the dangers then that a place like Dubai faces, where they've set it up on such short notice, but they don't have that history? of regulatory development and sophistication. That's not to say the people there are unsophisticated. They've hired the best people from around the world. But they don't have that history of deliberation, that in a desire to put themselves on the map, be the first in every category, to make a name for themselves. They seem to have gone too far too quickly. So again, from the standpoint of stability, what are the dangers they face?
I don't necessarily want to slag off other jurisdictions.
No, but in terms of what can we learn from on a principle basis?
Exactly. On a principle basis, I think other places tried, because you mentioned it, the self-regulation, letting the industry self-regulate, and that to a large degree has failed. The dangers, obviously, again, are from the perspective of investor protection, because regulation, all the regulation that is in place right now exists for very specific purposes. Quite often regulation is there because sometime in the past something has happened. This might be public knowledge, it might not be public knowledge, but usually regulation exists because people were fraudulently cheated out of money or assets. And the regulator is there to protect that. So when you set up an environment where you invite people who maybe don't see the value of regulation or don't necessarily want to be complying with regulation, you might invite people that are not interested in building a stable and secure environment. Because that's what you want, right? You want responsible innovation that is compliant, that is constructive, forward-looking, but also ensures that it complies with regulation.
So then, despite the best of intentions, and we're not casting aspersions on the intentions of the government or the regulators in Dubai, sometimes by being too lax, by being too liberal, you might attract unsavory characters to your market.
Possible. Yeah.
And that marks the end of the first part of our conversation with Don Day. The full version will be uploaded in due course. Hope you stay tuned for that.